Okay, we are here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia with Councilmember Jamie Gauthier. Councilmember, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yesterday, you chaired a very important hearing about housing in the city of Philadelphia. And what I'd like to do before we get into the hearing specifically, I'd like to talk a little bit about one of the reasons the hearing was held, the University City Townhomes. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening there?
It's just a heartbreaking situation. The University City Townhomes is what would be considered a low-income housing site at 40th and Market. For 40 years, it's existed as housing in the heart of University City that is affordable to low-income families. So these are mostly 3 and 4 bedroom units, at 40th and Market, near transit, near, healthcare, near jobs, near, schools that people want their children to attend. Several months ago, residents of the townhomes were given notice that the owner was canceling the development's affordability contract with HUD, which is what makes it affordable, and that residents would need to move by July. What's also interesting about the townhomes, among other things, the townhomes is located at a site that was raised for development by the city of Philadelphia in concert with University City institutions. And so at one point, this site and the area surrounding it was home to a very stable working class neighborhood called the Black Bottom. The city eminent domain the land of the Black Bottom so that University City institutions, including the Science Center, as well as Drexel and Penn, could form and grow. And upwards of 15,000 Black residents were displaced from the Black Bottom. And it is only because former Black Bottom residents and activists fought for affordable housing to be placed on this site that the University City Townhomes even exist in the first place. So after a long fight and a lot of advocacy from former residents, this particular site, as well as a site across the street, was designated to remain affordable housing. And that was a promise to the community. But now fast forward 40 years later, the land value is a lot different than it was 40 years ago. This is a site that if the owners have the opportunity to level these buildings and sell it for life sciences development, is estimated to be worth between $75 to $100 million. So there's a very strong profit incentive for the owners to move the residents from this site, knock down these buildings and sell it for development. But at the same time, these families have lived there, most of them for over a decade. Some of the families on the site have lived there for over 40 years since the site's inception. And so the prospect of people being asked to pick up their entire lives and move from a place where they feel safe and connected to resources to God knows where is very painful and stressful for residents. And I also think it puts in danger the prospect of having any affordable housing in University City. It's literally one of the last remaining sites. So a tragic situation.
And it's incredibly problematic because when you look at University City, and one of the things that was discussed in the hearing yesterday are the amenities, access to public transportation, jobs, doctor's offices, things like that. Now, if you're asking somebody who's lived there for 40 years to up and move somewhere else, they're losing access to these things. They're probably might have to find new doctors. They might have to do different things. And then there's another unique problem to this. One of the things that came up in the hearing yesterday was the idea of Section 8 vouchers. And so the idea is, okay, if you have to move, we're going to give you a voucher that you can then take to your next residence. But that's not the case usually.
Yeah, so there are a few things at play here. One, I think there's this, I guess, thought, in our society that it is okay for people, if they are poor, if they are working class, to just be moved and shuttled all about, right? Doesn't matter if they're moved from neighborhoods where they're stable and where they're connected to a network of resources. If they don't own property, it's fine to just displace people and move them all about the region, right? Whether they feel comfortable and safe with that idea or not. And the other idea is this notion that, oh, it's okay because we're just going to give people housing vouchers and they'll be able to find housing elsewhere. The reality is that it will be incredibly hard for people to find any level of affordability that's close to what they're getting at 40th and Market in an area that is as safe and amenity rich as 40th and Market. Most of the city's affordable housing stock, the affordable housing stock that we have left as a city, are located in neighborhoods that are really struggling with gun violence, with poor housing conditions, with schools that are crumbling, and a host of other issues that residents don't want to contend with. Additionally, as you heard yesterday, nearly half of the people who are given Section 8 housing vouchers are unable to use them because of housing discrimination. So because of their race, because they're elderly, because they have children, or because property owners just don't want to deal with government programs that they see as complicated, many times people are not even able to use those vouchers. So it is very unclear where people are going to go.
And for people who are not able to use the vouchers, they lose over $460 of their monthly income, which is about 41% of their income. That's astounding. So in your opening remarks yesterday, you mentioned that in order to afford a two-bedroom unit in Philadelphia, an individual would need to have an annual household income of $50,400 or earn about $24 an hour. At minimum wage, someone would have to work 132 hours per week to be able to afford that. So it's also the compounding of the problem where when you take away somebody's home that they've been in for 40 years and you're taking them out of their neighborhood and you're not giving them the means to find a new place to live that's similar, you're also going to make them work more if they can. You're going to be making them do more things in a different area in order to afford their housing. So when we look at this from things the city can do, and one of the things that came out of the hearing yesterday was that maybe there needs to be more help from the federal government. And I'd like to get to that in a second. But before that, are there any local solutions or things that could help, such as maybe expanding the housing authority? Is there anything like that that can be done that can help mitigate this issue?
I mean, with respect to the townhomes in particular, I introduced legislation last council session that implemented a 12-month demolition ban on the property and also instituted an affordable housing overlay, saying that at least a portion of the site had to be dedicated to affordable housing. That has, the owners don't want that to happen. They do not want that legislation to be permanent. And so it's created a space for negotiation. So we are negotiating, and what we're trying to do is just get the most just outcome possible for the residents and for the future of affordable housing at that site. More broadly, yes, there are things that the city can do and I think needs to do because this is a big impending crisis. There are 5,400 of these units that are set to expire over the next 5 years and a little over 12,000 units that are set to expire across the city in a decade. And that time is going to move quickly. And so the city has to have a plan. And so one of the things that was talked about in yesterday's hearing is this idea of a right of first refusal, where either the city or tenant groups it would be mandated that they have to be approached first with the prospect of buying those properties so that they can remain affordable for residents. I think that's a great idea that we should pursue. Right now, all we have is notice, right? But we need to have a way to act on that notice. I also think that we need more funding available. If you look at a site like the University City Townhomes, it's incredibly valuable. So for the city to be an active player in a conversation about acquiring that property, we would need to have millions of dollars set aside for this. And I do believe that it's a worthy cause, and we should make more resources available to acquire such properties or to help other organizations acquire such properties. In terms of, PHA and expanding PHA, the Philadelphia Housing Authority is actually governed federally. That's not a city agency. So we would need help from the federal government to really expand the resources of the housing authority. But it is critical that we do so. Right now, the housing authority is working on housing people who signed up for housing 10 years ago. So they do not have the ability to manage the demand for public housing that currently exists in the city without more resources from the federal government. Also, it should be noted that these properties that we're talking about, properties with expiring affordability agreements, these were programs, whether we're talking about low-income housing tax credits or contracts that are supported by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. These were federal programs. So localities worked in concert with the federal government to even put these housing developments in place in the first place. So the fact that these developments are expiring and we're now facing this impending crisis should not be something that the city has to face all by itself. We really need the partnership of the federal government and the state government. And it should be noted that we invited HUD. We also invited our state agency, PHFA, to the hearing yesterday, and they declined to participate. And so with such a dire crisis facing us, I would hope that we would see more active partnership from our state and federal agencies on this issue.
And when we talk about the poverty epidemic we're dealing with in the city, housing instability is one of the main drivers of that. So it almost makes too much sense to be having this conversation now and trying to figure out solutions. I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on WPPM 106.5.
Thanks, Larry. And thank you for joining us, council member. I really appreciate it. You said that over the next 10 years, there's going to be 12,000 units of affordable housing lost due to these covenants coming to an end.
Not all of them, it's not certain that all of them will be lost. What will happen is that the contracts or the subsidies will expire. Some of these are owned by mission-oriented organizations that could choose to renew these contracts. Some of them are owned by private entities like the one at 40th and Market, right? Where they're sitting on land that has become just so much more valuable than when these housing developments were formed. And so the owners, because they're not particularly mission driven, see this as an investment and they see the opportunity to cash out. Moreover, many of these properties need investment so that they're in good working order. So there's the risk that an owner can decide to cash out. There's a risk that an owner doesn't have the resources necessary to keep the properties in good working order. And that puts 12,000 housing units at risk, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And so the city has to identify all these properties, identify when they're going to expire, and come up with a plan so that 12,000 families are not on the street.
Now, since it sounds like we have a little bit of time to work with to put a plan like this together, is that something that's come up in the budget and the current talks about the current budget? How to, at least get started solving this problem?
Yes. I think we're beginning to focus on this issue. I mean, this issue has been around for a long time, and there have been resources from the city to preserve these units, but I would say it's just not enough resources. We have now, with the leadership of Council President Clark, the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative, which will make $400 million available for affordable housing and other efforts over a 4-year period. So some money will come from there, and that will be sort of batted around this budget season. But I also think we drastically need help from our state and federal partners. And with the case of University City Townhomes, I also think it would be good if, area institutions also felt an onus to contribute to a just outcome here, since their very existence is the reason why, the black bottom was raised in the first place.
Okay, now, what is the status of these residents in this townhomes development? Do they still have to be out by July? Are they kind of in limbo? Has an injunction been filed? Where are they now?
Well, many of them are still in the property. I will say that the fact that we instituted a demolition ban on the property, it means that as long as those buildings are standing, they can't evict anyone. So legally, they're not able to evict anyone from the property as long as it stands as a housing development. So I think what we did allowed for more time and space, but what has been stated to the residents by the owner is that there's this July timeline, and that has stressed many people out. And one major reason for that stress is because they don't yet have housing vouchers delivered to them. So it was sort of, when the notice was first given, it was explained to people that they would have a year to find another place to live, right? And they would get housing vouchers and relocation assistance. The housing vouchers have not been delivered by HUD yet. And so people are literally in limbo. They can't actively search for another space until they have, the housing vouchers that would support their ability to move into another housing unit. And so there's a major gap in people really having the ability to look for new housing, but they're still being told by the owner that they need to move by July. So you can imagine how stressful that is for a working person, with kids and many other responsibilities to have to worry about.
Yeah, because no one likes moving. That's just the bottom line. No one likes moving. It's a nasty experience, involves a lot of packing. And when you're trying to do it and you're trying to find affordable housing in a neighborhood that you're used to living in, and I don't think we talk about that much, the fact that you're basically uprooting people from a home that they've known for 4 years.
And, to the places that people are being told about, or it's suggested that they can afford, they do not want to live, they don't want to move there, right? People feel a level of safety at 40th and Market that they do not feel in other areas of West Philly and Southwest Philly, and other areas of Philadelphia. And so that's huge for a family as well. And I just don't think the proper respect has been given to that issue, and to the fact that people deserve to be in a place where they feel safe and connected to amenities and resources.
Now, you had the hearing yesterday, and I'm guessing that that's your response to this issue from a councilmanic perspective. What's next on that, or is there a next step?
Well, we're continuing to negotiate with the owners of the townhomes to try to get a just resolution there. As it relates to the broader issue, we want to convene partners towards some of the solutions discussed yesterday, whether that be implementing a right of refusal policy and coming up with ways to create resident organizations so that residents are able to acquire these properties and have, a say in their own destiny and have ownership in the places where they've been living for so long. Another solution that we want to move on is making sure that we have enough funding to acquire these properties and to invest in these properties. And so there were some really good solutions that came up yesterday that it will take a number of different partners at all levels of government to institute. I also, I'm not sure what kind of infrastructure it will require, but I am also very disturbed by the fact that so few people are able to successfully use Section 8 housing vouchers. And I do think we have to do something about that from a policy and a resident protection perspective. Folks who are using vouchers should not be discriminated against in our housing market. And I think that's something that we'll need to work on as a city as well.
Okay, thanks, Councilwoman. Councilmember, I always get that mixed up. And we'll be. I'll return to Larry McGlynn, my co-host, and Larry. You have another question?
I do, but just on what you just said, Councilmember, I feel like discrimination is one of the unwritten rules of real estate. Like
unfortunately,
that's just how it's always been in different ways. But at least right now, the problem's identified, and you saw some of the solutions. I was particularly interested in what you just mentioned, that I guess what you would call almost like a co-op model where people could take ownership of the building themselves, and that could be very useful. But do you think, and this is a very tough question to ask because you just had the hearing, but 5 years down the road from now, what are some of the things that have to come together to make that successful resolution? And what does that resolution look like? And again, that's a little unfair because you just had the hearing, but I
think the city has to prioritize this issue. I have to be frank in saying that I wish that the response yesterday from the administration about how they're thinking about this issue and acting on this issue was stronger. We have to see this as a crisis, even if we understand that it's not a crisis that we're going to solve all on our own. We have to be willing to rally the troops at other levels of government to help us with this crisis. And we have to understand that people being displaced from their housing is not just a housing issue, that it will put a burden on all kinds of other systems in the city, including the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, the homeless serving system. And so this isn't just about the 12,000 units. It's about what will happen to families and what the full burden will be for the city if we have 12,000 families who lose their housing with no plan and no support from the city of Philadelphia. So I think the first major step that we have to take in really making headway on this issue as a city in the next 5 years is prioritization. The second is advocating to federal partners, state partners, and all of the agencies that will really have to be at the table on this in order for us to come up with a comprehensive solution. But I don't think it's hopeless. I think the runway is long enough. We just have to start now.
Councilmember Jamie Gauthier, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me and for focusing on this. I really appreciate it.